this game is about longevity. It's not about your immediately launch peak player count. Like you want people to come back to this game and to keep playing it in 5, 10, 20 years.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Summoning Hour, an everything gaming podcast. Fighting games are easier to start than ever. Modern controls, better tutorials, rollback netcode, and free-to-play releases have removed a lot of the old barriers. But the distance between picking up a controller and feeling competitive can still feel enormous. In this episode, I'm having a casual conversation with my friend Cameron Fraser about how fighting games evolved from the arcade era, why single-player modes and local communities still matter, and what the genre needs next. Check it out.
Cool. So I've been thinking about fighting games as I've been trying to get into them more. Like I was big into Soul Calibur 2. I was big into Street Fighter. What was that? 4. I was big into 2XKO right now, and so I keep seeing this iteration over time where it seems like they're making games fighting games easier to grasp and get into, but then that ceiling is still widely unapproachable. They've added more elaborate training systems, more like better feedback, and you're getting a lot more tools in the training rooms to be able to get that information and teach yourself how to improve. But it feels like it's still separate. Like you really have to do your homework and be a part of the community to really get better and be not just a fan of fighting games, but to be a contender. You have to be a part of the community. And I know a lot of the scene ends up being in local scenes around the country. That's the Evo moments I've seen. So so your history with fighting games, how far back do you go? How old school are you?
I mean, yeah, so we can, and to address kind of that question of entry level, yeah, we kind of have to break down sort of the quick history of it. And, there's ages. I can kind of refer to them as waves. So the first wave starts with Street Fighter 2, 1991, I think. Um, you know, that's when I start kind of getting into it. It was that and Mortal Kombat. I mean, Street Fighter 2, it's the primordial ooze that, you know, everything kind of originates from and will be compared to, because think about it, before then, PvP in video games, it was, you kind of had some direct competition games like Pong, Joust. Early on, you had really, really basic, kind of setups. Otherwise, it was like a high score competition thing, right? One player
Yeah.
would play, next player would play. So Street Fighter 2 comes out, blows the whole world up. Um, I've always kind of been competitive. I played a lot of sports growing up, so yeah, that kind of direct face-to-face competition. You're literally standing next to the guy or person that you're playing against, shoulder. It's reflected right there. You're punching and kicking each other in the face. Yeah, I think that helped it stand out from obviously a lot of other games back then. Um, I had my dad was big in showing me martial arts movies growing up, so correlation to where you actually get to sort of the escape fantasy of embodying that, and then all of a sudden you throw in magic fireballs and crazy projectiles, and it just goes from there, right? So that was, you can consider that like the first wave, or what some call the golden age, which is, once Street Fighter 2 blows up, then everybody who's anybody is just throwing something at a dartboard and hoping it sticks. You get Mortal Kombat, which uniquely had live action actors do all the moves that they then, recorded, copied, and programmed and put into the game, which was kind of new and technology wise. At that point, you had crazy games like Clay Fighter, which was, claymation, right?
Oh yeah.
It was, so all over the place.
Primal Rage with a
Primal
dinosaur.
Rage, right? So out of that, you kind of get two other than Mortal Kombat, which is sort of an anomaly. NetherRealms is sort of in its own thing, being kind of like the only Western fighting game developer that managed to survive that first wave. So out of that, you kind of get Capcom and you get SNK. Those are kind of the two big ones. Capcom, obviously Street Fighter. They do stuff like Darkstalkers. They do a bunch of whole other ones that kind of don't make it out. Capcom or SNK famously is King of Fighters, Fatal Fury, so forth. Um, ironically enough, you brought up Arslan in Pakistan. SNK kind of has the same effect with its machines all ended up in like Mexico and South America because they were obviously a lot cheaper to get. Anybody who's played in the old school arcades, those SNK machines usually were bundle machines, right? You had like four
Yeah.
games in one. So I think that was like the value thing. So yeah, cheaper places in South and Central America. So now some of the best SNK players, King of Fighter players in the world are from that area. They've actually got
I
a
was
decent
always I was
scene.
always curious about those cabinets because I'm like, those were the best. Like you got 4 games, 4
Right.
choices, and it was like, okay, Metal Slug, Samurai Showdown.
Move, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense to me, but they were the only ones who ever did that.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot. I mean, I think once you started making that machine, and I think it was partially because SNK made their own arcade boards too, so they could probably
Mhm.
afford to do that. Whereas if you're just a normal, whatever, and your costs are probably different. But yeah, so after that first wave, you kind of had what people call the dark ages, which is that second wave where you had kind of first wave lasts pretty much the whole 90s. That's kind of like as arcades are sort of slowly dying out, consoles are sort of taking over. You see this kind of shift into like 3D arena fighters specifically. So that's when you see
Mhm.
Tekken start to get more popular, Soul Calibur starts to get more popular. Mortal Kombat becomes a 3D fighter for a while. Capcom and SNK are no different. You get the Street Fighter EX series, you get King of Fighters Maximum Impact series. None of these really have any effects. There's no community that forms out of it either casually or competitively as compared to the first wave. Coincidentally, this is when you see the rise of companies like Arc System Works and French Bread. Arc System Works famously Guilty Gear to start with. French Bread does all the kind of Melty Blood and Uni games, um, which are colloquially now called anime fighters, but back in the day, an anime fighter was actually an anime fighter. It was a licensed anime game that, they had some company sort of half-ass. And there's a lot of Naruto games from that age. Some, obviously some are okay, some aren't, but it was a lot of just sort of slop, weren't really competitive, weren't really viable. They were just sort of there for the actual anime fans. But with the sort of success of Arc System Works and Melty Blood, who kind of, I guess you could say, kept the scene alive in that second wave in those dark ages, with the 2D aspects. That sort of led the scene to more what will become more anime games in the actual term anime game as we get into. So yeah, dark, and in the MMOs in that 2000s, I think had a big impact on obviously all game development as a whole. So I think you had weird periods in all sort of themes, but fighting games specifically at the 2000s were not great um, in the grand scheme of things. Street Fighter 4, that was sort of the thing that kicks off you would call the third wave. And what's specific to that is you have all these returning IPs from the first wave kind of get back into their original grooves, right? So after
Right.
all of the 3D nonsense, movement and gameplay wise, Street Fighter 4 goes back, basically becomes Street Fighter 2 again. It's just now in 3D. And there's obviously skepticism, but the minute you start playing it, people start seeing it. Oh, it plays exactly like a 2D fighter, but now it's in 3D. So that sort of sparks the wave again of as I said, those original IPs from that first era. Arc System Works is now in there with Guilty Gear and like Blast Blue, which is sort of their like alternate dimension Guilty Gear. Um, Tekken comes back with like 6 and 7, King of Fighters as well. Marvel vs. Capcom 3, another big one, obviously. That was Marvel vs. Capcom 2 being one of the biggest games in the series. So yeah, so you kind of have this revitalization, the sort of third wave, really popular, and that's when online play kind of starts to get involved because by this point most arcades in the country are dead, they're gone. You know, there's not really there are competitive scenes, but they're in very small knit communities that you kind of have to know or seek out. Um, And so this is where you start to see the development of rollback netcode. And that's a big deal because
Yeah.
yeah, up until that point, online play for most games was fine. You would have lag and it didn't affect the overall gameplay as a whole. Fighting games, that match is fast. Those inputs are precise. They have to be precise. And so just most networks were just not up to speed. So you
Yeah.
see the development of this implementation that kind of uh, takes this approach of having all sort of the multiple things playing the same games at the same time, but it uses kind of a prediction network to sort of assume what input that person is going to input and matches it with yours, and that kind of helps with like low latency, and it ended up working really well. And so now if you launch as a mainstream, if you launch a game without rollback netcode, it's almost like dead on arrival as far as the community. So that kind of then brings us to this precarious fourth wave that we're in. Um, after Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 5, all these new King Fighter, and we kind of have you have on the one hand, you have legacy games, so games that have existed, IPs that have existed since the 90s. They have that core base. Soul Calibur you mentioned.
Mhm.
The last Soul Calibur game wasn't considered successful by standards, so now there's a clamoring to get it to come back as the next thing. There's um, you know, and then so you had those initial IPs, and now you have new fighting games based on pre-existing IPs elsewhere. So that kind of started with Dragon Ball Fighters, right?
Yep.
So there have been as the Dragon Ball used to exist and still kind of does exist in that original anime fighter space where it was just so many Dragon Ball games over the years, and yeah, like right, like you can play everybody, like 100 fighters. It's like, okay, so this is not a balanced game at all. Um,
I can only go through the Cell Saga so many times.
Right, exactly. So Arc System Works, Guilty Gear, got a hold of Dragon Ball license, and so this was sort of seen, and it's a tag fighter, so they hadn't done before. So this is their sort of venture into that space, and everybody obviously was cautious at first, but yeah, it ended up being one of the most successful fighting games of its time. Massive tournaments, massive. That's one of the tournaments I ran down in Burbank was explicitly fighters. Just someone they managed to balance a game that shouldn't be balanced because it's a bunch of like overroided superheroes like firing energy beams at each other. But like there are iconic moments now in the scene specifically from that game that and if anybody is starting to play Marvel Tokon, Deadpool has it. Deadpool's entire moveset is basically breaking the fourth wall, obviously. But he references fighting games from across the entire spectrum, and he's referencing obviously because it's Arc System Works and they developed the game. But yeah, there's like 2 or 3 Dragon Ball Fighters moves in that game already, just that Deadpool emulates. So game was huge smash success. Um, and so now you have, as I said, pre-existing IPs from other things that are getting brought into the space. We have Marvel Tokon, as I just said, although Marvel famously has been in that space for a while. But otherwise, Avatar Legends is one that just came out. We had Hunter x Hunter, which wasn't as great and was kind of janky, but again, another attempt to try and take a popular IP and make it a legitimate fighter. Um, and then famously, NetherRealm's doing Injustice and Injustice 2. So you're not really seeing a lot of new fighting games. It's kind of an interesting time, and I'm kind of cautious about, as you brought up, Saudi Arabia. There's that kind of attention now. The esports scene, I don't think took off the way anybody really wanted it to or anticipated. You've brought that up a lot with Overwatch.
Yeah.
Um, and Street Fighter Five kind of tried that too. The first Evo was, I think, broadcast on ESPN2. I remember specifically. So that kind of leaves us with I think, to your point, the hostility of trying to get into the scene can be overwhelming. I've had the luxury of just casually playing this game all these games over the last, 30, 35 years. So I have no problem dipping in and out of any tournament, getting O2'd, right? Easily just scrubbing it up and then going and getting a beer and being like, "Ugh." So
Right.
it's one of those things, right? But yeah, if you're trying to just jump in, that can definitely be daunting. And that's where I think a lot of the online play helps. Um, Another good aspect is there are now more, more free to play fighting games. So 2XKO you brought up is a perfect example, right? Most people aren't, and especially with the rise of equipment and consoles and gamings, most people don't want to commit to an $80, $70 game, immediately jump in online, get their butts handed to them and frustratingly quit, right? So that's one
And
of the great
one of the yeah, and then being told one of the best ways to improve is not use a control pad, but buy this $120 control stick.
and that is absolutely wrong, and we can get into that in a second. Um,
Sweet.
but yeah, so that's one of the great things about 2XK is no financial investment. Literally, you can unlock all, and unlike League of Legends, which some people might find daunting because, it's got however 100 main characters, it's only 12, 14 characters right now in 2XKO, right? So easy to get into. Um, what's I gonna talk about? Oh, control usage. So yes, there was that movement to kind of, and it is an attempt to get more people in, obviously, to simplify control schemes. So, uh, there was probably an earlier example of it, but Street Fighter 6 will be the best one because they have their casual and their modern control mapping, where obviously fighting games are notoriously motion input. That was kind of one of the biggest sort of hooking points in the early days, right? As most arcades, you just press a button and the person would do a thing. And that was similar, but all of a sudden you could do a motion input and do a thing, and they would do a crazy spinning kick or a crazy uppercut, right? And that was if you press the button really fast, rapidly, the jungle dude would electrify himself, right? So that was sort of what hooked obviously a lot of the core fan base. So yeah, there was obviously pushback of initially I think trying to simplify this control to just to get more people in. The compromise has sort of been less giving them less of a competitive edge, nerfing those auto combos, those easy modern moves, because the point is, all right, well, learn this first, learn how to play the game first using these simple controls, and then when you're ready, jump over to how the game is actually supposed to be played. I think this is a good way to start that kind of conversation. Um, I think just fighting games are what they are. They're a competition. A lot of people aren't playing video games for that kind of competition, right? And this is where um, the single player aspect of fighting games can actually really be important. There was a good period sort of in that early second wave, so starting with Street Fighter 4, there was a lot of once the online rollback netcode and stuff started to get a lot crisper and a lot more the foundation started to get a lot laid. You had that sort of leech in of the loot bot aspect, I guess, but just the constant online service aspect of it. So Street Fighter 5 notoriously launched with no single player arcade mode, right? So that was a huge failure. It was a huge dumb idea. It seems like, oh, well, they'll just immediately jump on and play. It's like, all right, well, what if there's a casual gamer who doesn't want to get their butts immediately handed to them and they just want to play through the story mode? One of my favorite aspects of fighting games is the lore. It's some of the most ridiculous writing
Oh
and
yeah.
story building you will ever encounter. There's so many plot holes, so many retcons, like Street Fighter, King of Fighters, right? All these characters are over 30, 40 years old, but we have to act like all of this time has existed and yet they haven't aged, but they have aged. So yeah, it's just ridiculous. And that's one of the fun aspects that I enjoy is um, Guilty Gear kind of was one of the first to do it is, rather than just have a simple arcade, you start, face 8 people. Maybe there's some dialogue in between one of the fights beforehand or blah blah blah. They actually started introducing like narrative cutscenes with your fights. They gave you story branching paths. They gave you alternate endings. Like they found a way to introduce RPG elements and other video game elements into their single player mode. Their survival modes, right, where usually you just see how many endless um, amounts of NPCs you can beat with a score. You would interject sort of like loot based, item based, and you saw this carried on into famously the Injustice series, which Injustice 2 famously was was a looter fighter essentially. So because you were a superhero, you could equip, and this is how they sort of baked in their alternate costumes designs as well. You could equip various different pieces that would affect not only your stats but your moves. And it was an amazing idea for a single player. Obviously, from a competitive standpoint, I think Soul Calibur tried to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. So, and yeah, from a non-competitive, balanced online thing, that's kind of what you need, right? And that's I think part of getting somebody who's not new into it, getting them hooked, and then you can kind of slowly experiment with the because if you're going to get frustrated, just facing NPCs, like yeah, then maybe the game isn't for you, right? But if you can at least start with a decent structure, climbing structure from a single player standpoint, so learning how everything works. And yeah, to your point, are training systems getting more intense? Yeah, but it's better if the game actually has a good tutorial system. Those are the two different things, right? Everybody wants frame data. You don't necessarily need frame data. There's so many people in the community now that will collect that stuff, the
Yeah.
minute
Right.
it comes out, right? Like you don't necessarily need it. It's good. It helps especially if you're a pro player and you're training for 6 or 8 hours and you just need to kind of have that like on hand as you're doing it, sure. But yeah, I think what's better is not just having a solid tutorial mode, but then how do you transition them from that tutorial mode into a single player experience that can get them hooked into the game, get them playing 10, 15, 20 hours through your whole roster, because why else would you release 20 characters if you don't want everybody to
Right.
play them, right? Give those characters some sort of compelling lore, something, some sort of interaction with them, some sort of story base. And that's kind of, I think, where you'll see the more successful video games. Dragon Ball Fighters as an example. It's Dragon Ball. You need to have an anime story in that game that people can go through. And sure enough, they did. It was silly and it made no sense. And it involved, you know, adding new androids and like weird clones of everybody because that gave you a reason. Why are you fighting everybody? Oh, because they're all evil clones. All right, sure. So,
Perfect.
but it was an engrossing single player experience and alongside other, single player aspects and stuff, and I think that's what helped that game grow. Marvel Tokon recent that just released has a weird Fall Guys style arcade brawler thing. It's absolutely nothing to do with the base of the game, but if you want to take a break from that, you can choose one of the avatars of the characters and run around and do Fall Guys stuff in this arena and collect points for your avatar. Like, great. So, yeah, as much as the fighting game competitive side exists, I think, yeah, to your point, it gets way too overhyped all the time. Obviously with streaming as easy as it is now, back in like, late 2000s, you would have to find like some weird third-party Chinese website that had like an upload, and you didn't know how old it was. Maybe it was 2 years, maybe it was 3 years, but it was there, and that's how you watched people play high levels of that game that you were interested in that nobody else knew about. Um, so yeah, so on that aspect, it is nice that it's so easy to play a fighting game now. It's so easy to get into. There are now that we're seeing more free to play games, not just 2X scale. There's another one called, this is going to be obscure. I'm going to try to remember the title. EFS Laugh Plus Plus. Yeah, right. Under Night and Birth, whatever, right? So but there's Kickstarters now, and that's good as people are starting to feel confident that they can try and take on the task themselves. You don't have to be a
Yeah.
massive development with an IP from some, pre-existing thing. So that's the one
Yeah.
good thing. Um,
I was actually really surprised to hear and look at finding more indie and even solo development fighters
mhm,
coming up. There was one on Steam during these last Steam days that was a fighting game roguelite.
yep,
I was like,
yep.
okay, that's cool. I mean,
The name of that one.
2X just came out with the climb to help that single player aspect because they don't have a story for you to
They
play,
didn't
but
have it, right? That's right. And
And they didn't have that at first, and you could either play bots or you played online, and that was it.
yeah,
And that wasn't like that's not a casual friendly experience for um a tag fighting game.
right.
Like that wasn't maybe the smartest way to launch, but they're recovering in that way. And so you have like the roguelike fighters, you got let's see, Combo Devils combines traditional and platform fighting mechanics with four-player co-op and roguelike progression.
That's
Umbral
the new
War,
Rivals of Aether rival. Yeah.
yep, Rivals of Aether, yep.
Yeah,
Uh, and
The Smash community is such an interesting kind of anomaly because they're the one fighting game community that's never been supported by the actual game developer Nintendo,
right,
which is nuts that they have never had that and just have managed. God, they've always been some of just the loudest crowds at any major tournament, right? They get just super into it, which is great. Um, then you have sort of certain incidents and scandals that happen, and it's like, okay, well, this is where you would kind of want Nintendo to have control and regulate that, so that you know that bad stuff doesn't happen.
and at
So
the
I,
same time, Nintendo's like, "You see what happens when we let you do this? This is why we're not doing this." Sure. So I'm curious how you think this longevity of a title, but you're still seeing new titles coming out, is going to play into that fourth wave finding its successor and the thing that really is that catalyst title to kick it off.
it's funny because when you call it first wave, now because we have online updates for everything, you have seasons that are broken down into the DLC. In the original days when you didn't have that, you would have 6 or 7 versions of essentially the same game. Street Fighter was notorious for this. See, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Super Street Fighter 2 Champions Edition. And these were all just essentially you know, updates to the game with buffs and nerfs. So different characters would have different frame datas in each one, would have extra moves, etc. There'd be more characters in one and less in the other. Um, so that's almost always been part of fighting games. There's always been this push and pull of update and balance of buffing and nerfing that I think is a lot more disruptive in other game scenes. Um, Partially because it's just always existed and the community just rides it every time. The most recent season of Street Fighter 6 just dropped. Um, and so you have a new character who's never existed before in the game. So everybody's super. She's a like Filipino curved, whatever their martial arts is. She has a really curved knife. It spins a lot. Yasmin, that's her name. Um, everybody loves her as a character, super hype. On the other hand, um, from a maybe higher competitive scene, there were very little changes addressed to what the community feels are the problems of the game. So that's that kind of give and take, that push and pull that has always kind of existed. I think on one hand, the community is always going to exist. Gamers have, we this, and I think it entails larger into these, as you said, games are dying, especially coming out of COVID. Uh, Too many, I guess we can call them game developers, although I would question their actual motives. Put too much money into over bloating, right? Trying to treat the rise of video games as a new Hollywood, as a new thing, and it wasn't. It never was going to be that. Interactive media is not for everybody. Like some people just want to sit and watch and not do anything, and that's the majority of people. So it'll take time for interactive media to, I think, even get close to where Hollywood is or most sort of forms of entertainment are. But the fact that it's growing is what enticed everybody to sort of jump in, and now they're all jumping ship. So I think the essence of all the scenes will stay. I think you see that in the fact that, 20, 30 years ago, it was the same. You would find a small arcade, you would go there, you would join the community. What I would say is like, yeah, if you ever experience hostility in the scene, I would immediately like try to go either A, talk to somebody else in that scene and address it because the FGC is absolutely notorious for being welcome and to not tolerating any kind of open hostility. And I can get into some good places around the city that are not even competitive tournaments, they're just casual nights. So like the whole scene is to just go there and to just play with everybody. You're not going to win anything. There's no entry fee, and it's just to embrace yourself in the community and maybe get better or just enjoy other people who enjoy what you enjoy. Um, but yeah, there will be an inevitable burst if we have people like Saudi Arabia investing so much money. You know, they've already owned uh, at least half of SNK's production stuff. They bought Evo. They have their own, World Cup supposed thing. And it's as a competitor, right? If you're training 6 to 8 hours a day and you've committed yourself to this, like that's a lot of money to say no to for playing a video game that you supposedly like, right? So it's even more commendable when you see players, for obvious reasons. So players like Sonic Fox, who is openly gender fluid, he doesn't want to go to Saudi Arabia. Why
Really?
would he? Why would they? That's a terrible ad. They have absolutely no interest in competing in. So yeah, they've openly said they won't compete in anything. You have, you know, uh, straighter, whiter dudes like Sajam, who is a famous commentator, who has openly said he will not take any money from them. He will not travel
Mhm.
for them. It's like for him, it's an easy answer, right? Like
Yeah.
he's found a nice niche in what he does. He doesn't need their money. But as I said, if you're an up and coming player and you're hungry and you're trying to break into the scene and all of a sudden you've been invited to a tournament where you could possibly win half a million, $1 million for it's hard. So I think the league, I think fighting games probably have the biggest presence on college campuses in the form of their own sort of clubs and so forth.
Yep.
Because it's a lot easier to have a fighting game tournament than it is, a big massive MOBA tournament, right? You don't need as much
Right.
space. Um, yeah, one of the benefits, to play devil's advocate of higher money and sponsorships is you get exposure into places that maybe wouldn't otherwise get it. So,
Yeah.
um, you mentioned, American players not dominating in those esports. Fighting games are one of those things that seem to be immune from that. Some of the best players in the world are from this country. Now, it kind of didn't used to be that way. Japan, obviously, back in the first few waves, had a pretty solid grip hold on everything just because that's where most of the games came from. Um, Travel, you mentioned travel. That's obviously a big thing too. Not everybody can go to these tournaments across the country or across the world. So having more tournaments, it used to just be Evo in Vegas. Now it's Evo Japan as well. They're doing Evo Paris,
Mhm.
they're doing Evo Singapore. So that giving people a chance who wouldn't otherwise be able to travel to compete on a major scene and potentially win money. Great, fantastic. That is a bonus for all. That's one of the reasons why you have Mena RD with Street Fighter 6 is from the Dominican Republic, right?
Yeah.
It came out of nowhere. He's won Capcom Cup twice. I think he's one of the only people to do that. He's a back-to-back Evo champion now. And he's taken all of his winnings and basically just built the community in the Dominican Republic. So now you just have killers coming out of the Dominican Republic.
Right.
Pakistan, same thing with Arslan Ash. All of his winnings he's used to develop the community in Pakistan. So now you've got a whole bunch coming out of there. So yeah, it's a forever give and take with that. And I think the competitive aspect helps. Just it constantly being the fact that people seem to want to watch it is good, or at least enough people want to watch it that it stays alive. As I said, the rollback netcode has changed it because now you know, you can watch weekly tournaments that are all online based, that are all high quality. TNS in Tampa is another one. Team Spooky in New York. They always run high quality tournaments almost every week. So as I said, it's never been a better time to try and get into fighting games, and it's never been a better time to be a fighting game enthusiast. All the negative aspects aside, and possibly, in spite of, um, yeah, I'm not particularly worried about the future, especially when you see at least the commitment from people who kind of seem to know what they're doing. So let's say Virtua Fighter is a good example. That game is has a that game is not going to be for everybody when it comes out. That game
No way.
has hard coordinate community, and I think they understand that, right? And they'll I think the era of trying to appease everybody, I think, is slowly fading out. Um, I think they realize that they have a core group of fans who will spend money on their product, so let's like appease them first, and then we can add other quality of life aspects sort of secondary as we go on. So yeah, the new Virtua Fighter coming out, obviously looks amazing. Like, especially when you compare it to the last game, which is almost, I think, 15 years old now. Um,
Yeah.
so that in and of itself is almost like a selling point for anybody, right? Um, Virtua Fighter notoriously has a great single player mode. That'll be another hype thing. NetherRealms, obviously, you have all the outside chaos with like Warner Brothers and mergering, and that affects their gaming division. I don't think Ed Boon has cared 1 minute. I think he's always had, I mean, the man has been there since day one. He's always had this passion for it. So I think the rumor now is there's probably a new Injustice game in the works. It's probably not going to be called Injustice because you can't really do anything more with that whole aspect of the comics, but it will be some sort of DC fighting game. That's the sort of rumor. So there's a lot of good stuff to look forward to. Yeah, I think it's fighting game are one of those sort of perpetual things where it always exists. You always sort of have an ecosystem, maybe compared to something like a JRPG or the RPG world that kind of goes through up and down shakeups, so kind of clear obscura sort of
Oh yeah.
stirring that pot in the way that it did is you're going to start to see a lot more sort of like attempts at the JRPG scene revitalization, right? But fighting games, I think, even in the Dark Ages, as I said, you had Arc System Works, you had French Bread, you had Melty Blood. So it's almost a sort of perpetual motion machine that I don't think will ever necessarily go away.
Yeah. I'm curious, is there a genre that you would want to take a single player fighting game and smash it with and just be like, we're going to do something really weird or fun because a single player aspect of a fighting game with this other thing would be beneficial for either transitioning to a competitive side or just because it would be a great way to use that IP and model?
So we've kind of seen that in the past, in rough games. I think the one that's coming to mind right now is a JRPG from the PlayStation 1 area called Legends of Legaia. And that was unique for it was turn-based, but it was turn-based where once you would input different directions or buttons to basically do different command acts. Um, so it'd be interesting to kind of see if they could do a fighting. I mean, and there's I think a couple of indie games that are trying that currently, to where yeah, it's like a turn it's like a random battle encounter, but once you're in a random battle, it's immediately a fighting game. Um, so that's kind of interesting. I think it'd be Cas BlazBlue recently did Our System Works did a Castlevania style with their IP. It wasn't necessarily like a fighting game aspect smashed into a Castlevania, Metroidvania. I think it was mostly just a Metroidvania with their characters. Um, but it would be interesting to see, and I think Smash uh Ultimate and Brawl kind of did that too, where you kind of had an adventure mode with the characters and it was kind of 2D platforming and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that innovation has always kind of existed and been implemented. It's just kind of like a game by game basis. Tekken 3 famously had like an arcade side scroller beat 'em up mode. That was sort of like a bonus thing. Um, but yeah, growing up playing fighting games, I didn't have an arcade stick. I had a console pad, PS1 pads, Sega pads, Super Nintendo pad, what have you. So, and I had some friends who were into the genre, but it wasn't like I had friends over all the time wanting to play fighting games. So that single player aspect was super important for hooking me and getting
Mm.
wanting to come back. I must have rented Street Fighter Alpha 3 a whole bunch of times pretty much because that single player aspect was so expansive that I wanted to finish it. I wanted to go all the way through it with every character. So yeah, as you said, I think that is as much as it is I think fighting games are the purest form of video game PvP as far as like, one-on-one goes. It's still a video game. It still needs to entertain people. It still needs to provide them with options. And if it's just, two dudes fighting on a screen and nothing else, like, yeah, people aren't going to come back to it as much as you maybe want to. So, yes, developing any kind of sort of innovative, I think, single player aspect, I would welcome into fighting games. Maybe not first person shooter, that might kind of defeat the purpose, but I am open to be persuaded otherwise if you can show me that it works and it's cool.
I mean, there's so many guns in 2XKO right now. It's like,
Yeah, so it's one of those realms that I think freedom of expression and creative expression comes through really well. Um, that's when I think my likes about 2XKO is how they managed to take those MOBA moves and make them make sense in a fighting game aspect because they should. It's in theory, but it's you still have to because of how many fighting game mechanics have become sort of implemented in the scene over time and how many uh slang moves for things that maybe didn't exist or shouldn't have existed or were bugs that are now kind of part of the scene or part of the competitive scene. um you know okizemis and fuzzy guards and mix-ups and yeah, things like that. So being able to sort of take a character like um Alawi, understand what her moveset is, understand that like she works, let's make her play. She has to lay down those tentacles as traps. Perfect. There are trap fighting game characters already. Let's model it off of that. Echo, who has, uh, basically can like do his move twice or go back in time. Similar stuff has existed in fighting games as far as like having like shadow characters and stuff. So yeah, just
right.
anybody who seems like they know what they're doing and embracing the kind of community and scene development, I think will succeed in the long term. There will always be stories coming out about, oh, well, and I think Marvel Token, just another one came out about this of, oh, well, peak player number count isn't what they'd hoped it would be. I don't
Right.
even I don't even know what that means, honestly, right? Like this game is about longevity. It's not about your immediately launched peak player count. Like you want people to come back to this game and to keep playing it in 5, 10, 20 years. You want this game to be brought up in a tournament 30 years from now as a side tournament that everybody gets super hyped for and just starts throwing in pot money and bet money. Like I think that should be your ultimate goal with at least fighting games because they don't ever end. It's not a single player. It's a single player experience that should never end. It's like the ultimate live service game that isn't a live service game. And I think that them trying to crack their brains around that and try to make money off of something that isn't necessarily supposed to make you that kind of money has been, yeah, part of the problem. As far as the controller or even just playing the game aspect, I think having the sort of simplified controls but high ceiling. You see that with Smash a lot too, right? Because Smash is it's like two or three buttons and it's just like a direction here, a direction there. And yet you watch these pro players are able to just take these supposedly simplistic moves and just like push that ceiling as high as they can. So, you know, I think just the nature of a fighting game will test that and push that regardless of if you as a developer are trying to put it in there in the first place. So yeah, you don't want your moves to be overly complex. Like there's some old SNK games where you've got like pretzel motions and stuff and really, yeah, really
Yeah.
complex movements that you kind of see a lot more games now are just kind of realizing that quarter circle, half circle, that kind of charge movements are good enough to sort of get the point across about what that move is supposed to do. Um, as I said, like yeah, you've got built-in moves already that have sort of become a thing that maybe weren't the thing. Anybody's rising uppercut move is now, inherently called a dragon punch or shoryu just because of Street Fighter, right? And
Yep.
that programmed move, excuse me, regardless of what it looks like, if it's Wolverine, going at an angle like this with his claws or Guile doing his like down crouching flash kick, right? Like the template's already there. So I think that's what ultimately frees up a lot of these creators to get weird with it. And why you're sort of seeing and it happened in that first wave where you'd have outside existing IPs try to get implemented into the space. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I think, was famous
Yep.
for having a Super Nintendo Sega fighting game that
Yep.
wasn't great, but it was there. And is sort of in that scene of retro games getting pulled back into the community for like mystery tournaments and stuff. Sailor Moon has another one that people can do weird broken stuff with, and it's sort of fun to watch periodically. But yeah, like SNK is bringing back its old franchise. The City of the Wolves is a sequel to a game that's almost 20 years old. They're bringing back new Fatal or new Art of Fighting, which is God, I think
Oh
the
wow.
last new one that came out was probably like 98 or something. Yeah, so it's good to see that like they're trying new things. I think the important message to push through at the end of the day is like all sort of communities of niche whatever what have you, like Warhammer or something like that. um Yeah, it's important. I think it's important to not push out anybody who's trying to get in. As I said, like, having a bad experience like you had with trying to run a tournament was unfortunate, right? Like Kenmore and Bellevue are far enough apart that you guys could easily share the space. But
Right.
and I
I was
never
It
yeah,
wasn't even a tournament. It was just like a casual fight
casual
night and
thing, yeah,
play.
right. So, I think yeah, those negatives aside, I think obviously come up in any aspect, exceptions to the rule.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the community exists as it is and as it always has, and there's enough strong-willed voices within that should somebody like Saudi Arabia or somebody like Saudi or somebody like Nintendo just pull funding for any sort of support after a game is made, they'll make it work. They'll figure it out. It may not be an esports arena with hundreds of people, but like they'll make it work. And then yeah, being online and having all these indie developers now, I think is another great sign that yeah, the genre is in a good place for as precarious as it may be.
So kind of distancing from what is and the way fighting games are talked about right now. I want to get your kind of personal ones out of this and just kind of like some fun thoughts on it. So I want to know what your least favorite like IP character kit and expression has been, or the character that you've been most disappointed in. The character that you like the most, like, is like your iconic character across whatever title or series. And I got one last follow up about fighting games in general, but I want to know what your characters are. Your least favorite, most favorite expression.
Least and most across any game of all time.
Yeah, any game all time.
I mean, I'll give most favorite. I'll do Ken just because I'm wearing the shirt. Um, it, that was the Ken Ryu rivalry that sort of developed over time. Yeah, it has just been one of those sort of fun video game things that I've been able to get to stick around. And them evolving him. And now the most recent thing is he went broke from crypto schemes. Like, sure, whatever. But yeah, him sort of being him and Ryu sort of just having this as I said, being the primordial Street Fighter being the primordial ooze of all games, and them sort of being the primordial ooze of your fighting game template characters. They are the Shoryu characters, the Shoto characters. That is the bread and butter basic, all rounder character now. That's what in any fighting game, that's what they're referred to as. So I think that's my easy answer for favorite. I think weirder. I always grooved with Faust from Guilty Gear just because of his randomness. The crazy former ex-serial killer doctor who's now good but has to wear a bag over his head and just throws. He was the first character to kind of have random RNG mechanics because he'll just
Oh,
throw
nice.
something out and it can be whatever. And from like 6 or 7 attacks, and so that was popular enough that it became a thing. And then they just made him super goofy as well. Um, See if I can get one more recent from let's say an existing IP. Let's see. I talked about Dragon Ball. Injustice. I really liked how they did the non uh popular main characters. So your Captain Colds, your
Right.
Firestorms, um, the mechanics. The Captain Cold had a mechanic built in where he would charge his cold gun up to certain levels, and everybody initially just kind of viewed that as gimmicky and novelty and what have you. And then you had a character like Sonic, a player like Sonic Fox, a living prodigy, just took him to an Evo tournament and just absolutely destroyed everybody with him with this supposedly goofy mechanic, right? So any character who can kind of Zappa from Guilty Gear takes the cake with as far as it's got the craziest, weirdest character designs that I usually always probably gravitate to more than others. Um, Duck King from King of Fighters is coming back from SNK. He's a 90s street break dancing Mohawk DJ with pet little chickadees. Like, yeah, that's one of the great things about fighting games is the sort of weirdness that can be implemented to it. Least favorite is usually when they try and play it super safe. Um, or when a character has just sort of kind of become an embodiment of such a negative aspect. Happy Chaos from Guilty Gear is a good example of that. Um, let's see, least favorite. Who did I never like? I never liked playing against boss characters are weird. Boss
Yeah.
characters are a unique aspect of fighting games because obviously they were made to be super cheap. But now you've kind of, because of DSC aspects, you've kind of got a thing where a boss character is nerfed or brought down, but implemented into the game as a main character. But you still designed it as a boss character, so he's still kind of almost like his existence is sort of unfair and unbalanced, as it were. Um, so yeah, any boss character that sort of gets designed to try and get implemented into the fighting game. Jinpachi from Tekken was a really annoying one. SNK was really famous for just having the most cheap, over the top, unnecessary bosses in the late 90s and early 2000s. Um, Seth guy, I never liked Seth. I don't
Yeah,
know why
I
I
never
never liked Seth.
liked that.
I never liked Seth. I mean, it was interesting when they brought him back for 5 and they did a gender swap, but then kept the voice. But like, yeah, just as a character, I never liked Seth. It's the same with any sort of copy character, any sort of mimic character. Like Mokujin's fun in Tekken because he's specifically supposed to be a training doll. That's why he's made of wood and he's animated, right? But like, yeah, Virtua Fighter's boss is famously this like silver sheeny metal thing that just copies everybody's moves, right? Um, you know, I think that's one of the reasons why Shang Tsung in Mortal Kombat works so well is because yeah, he can transform into other characters, but he has his own complete move set that like
Yeah,
is his own thing. He's a weird Eastern wizard necro guy. So yeah, like the copy thing, yeah, if that's your only aspect to the character, that's usually my least favorite, I would say.
I think that's pretty fair. Like, be more original. Don't just be another character.
Yeah,
Be anyone that you can get. Like,
lazy.
yeah, that's kind of, I wouldn't say lazy, but it's one of those things that's just like, can we have a different character?
Yeah, I'll take back the lazy. It was tropey. It was tropey even back when it
Yeah,
first started. Yeah, so
I agree. And I mean, it was, I could see why it became a thing, but at the same time, as a player, it's like I'd rather have something else. It's like you got your almonds in my ice cream, and I'm like, I don't need crunchy bits in my ice cream,
right.
or at least make it chocolate.
Chocolate.
But last question for you: what is a fighting game that's missing right now? Whether it's an existing series or a type that hasn't been out, like Power Stone is a very popular
Hearthstone.
fighting game that's brought up, but hasn't been remade from the Dreamcast era. So, what genre or series of fighting game is missing, or is there like a unique take that you're like ready to see?
I think the 3D or Tekken Soul Calibur thing is ready for a new wave, new revolution. Because yeah, Tekken kind of controlled that space for a long time. You had a lot of weird 3D fighting games back in like the late 90s and early 2000s, like Battle Arena Toshinden. Um, God, what was the Fatal Bushido Blade? That was an interesting one too. Um, so I think yeah, now and that's going to be interesting with the guy Harada who was the Tekken creator finally left Namco. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does with his new game, his new project, if that's going to be the next succession of Tekken, what that's going to look like. It'd be interesting to see Soul Calibur come back. Any sort of trying to the ring out mechanic is so interesting to fighting games. It being just sort of an automatic KO would be interesting to see how you could implement that in a modern competitive space. So that's what I think we're kind of missing right now. The 2D planes, the tag fighters, we're good eatons on those. Yeah, it'd be interesting. I'd like another Soul Calibur. Maybe bring back a 3D fighter that I can think of that maybe nobody knows or that was popular. See if that would hit again. That'd be my thing. Also, Def Jam. I'd be okay with a new Def Jam
Oh
game,
yeah.
which is just rappers fighting each other. I'd be okay with that too. That'd be interesting to see. Or musicians sort of fighting each other. Maybe Def Jam versus rock stars or something. That'd be interesting. Obviously, you've got IP and licensing issues there, but that'd be interesting to see. They did it once.
And they did it once, and that was before celebrities were endorsing their
Yep.
own likenesses in other games. And like, what was it, like Cardi B in Call of Duty, like, or Nicki Minaj in Call of Duty, like,
Oh, that's right. Nicki Minaj did do that Call of Duty, or yeah,
yeah.
Fortnite just being a slot bowl for all celebrities.
It's like,
Yep.
yo, I mean, a Fortnite fighting game.
There you
You
go.
got all those characters. You could easily take their kind of lore from it and stick it together, and it kind of works. I kind of works. I mean, they've done all sorts of weird expansions and seasons and mechanics that way. Like now they have mini pets that enable like enhance your weapons and stuff, and cute little things and backpacks and all that stuff. And it's I don't know. Fortnite's kind of weird, and Roblox. I've played enough Roblox games with my kids, so I'm just like, can we get something a little more thought out? So I don't think a fighting game in Roblox is really going to happen, but uh, those would be really interesting spaces to see a fighting game crop up in. Well, thanks for the conversation. I really appreciate it. I know it's
Yeah.
maybe a deviation from the conversations you're listening to on the podcast, but I really like casual conversations and just talking about games.
Thanks again to Cameron for joining me for a different kind of episode. What fighting game first pulled you into the genre, and what do you think fighting games still need? Let me know in the comments or continue the conversation with us on Discord. If you find the episode enjoyable, subscribe to the Summoning Hour and share it with someone who still remembers their first arcade rival.